Bloodstream Journeys is produced by Bloodstream Media and made possible exclusively by BioMarin. Hi there, I'm Heather Robb, and this is Journeys, a new monthly podcast from Bloodstream Media that features the stories of 3 individuals within the bleeding disorders community. March has blown in like a lion, and we have got some awesome stories to share with you this month. Today, we're going to hear the journeys of 3 incredible people who have gone to extraordinary lengths to ensure the safety and security of their child. From embracing the unknown of a radical clinical trial to moving thousands of miles for better care, these 3 stories demonstrate the lengths a parent will go to when the well-being of their child is at stake. Our first contributor is Jimmy Oligari. Jimmy proclaims 2019 to be the most important year of his life, most notably because it's the year he became a father. But there's more to it than that. Here is Jimmy Oligari.
2019 was probably the most important year in my life so far. The year ended with me becoming a father, a status my wife and I fought so hard to achieve. And in 2019, it became a reality. Becoming parents wasn't exactly straightforward for us. We had to struggle to get pregnant for most of our marriage. My doctor at the time had informed me that hydroxyurea, a mild chemotherapy I had been taking to manage the symptoms of sickle cell, might be the culprit. At the time, hydroxyurea seemed to be effective in my life. I was in the emergency room less frequently, and my pain crises became less violent and milder. So cutting that particular medication was one of the tougher decisions I've ever had to make. I would deliberately be opening myself up to a world of hurt to achieve this dream, which in hindsight, I will do over and over again. Now that I'm finally living my dream as a parent, I'm eternally grateful for the good health of mother and baby, but I'd be remiss to ignore the shadow of guilt that looms over my bundle of joy. Unlike me, my son will not inherit the full-blown sickle cell anemia gene from 2 S genotypes from each parent. Instead, he will inherit only 1 S genotype from me. Admittedly, living with sickle cell trait as opposed to sickle cell anemia is chalk and cheese. He will grow up with a relatively healthy life uninterrupted by the rigors of sickle cell, but the disease's congenial nature has given me even more reasons to stay awake at night. I worry that although my son is restricted to the trait, his offspring might not be. I worry about how the trait will play out in his life. No matter how minuscule the effects may be, the thought of him enduring even a fraction of what I went through cuts deep. My concerns for his future health extends all the way to something as simple as what type of sports he can play and when he can play them. For example, there are numerous stories of American football players in the college and professional level dropping dead while playing the game they love because of overexertion. In Colorado, they even are more likely to meet an early demise because of the notoriously thin air. So although the trait is not as powerful as its ugly big brother, it also carries its fair share of deadly consequences if not monitored properly. A month before my son arrived, after coming to the stark realization that I will pass something potentially deadly to my first child, my wife and I decided it was finally time to act. For as long as I remember, my parents had been pushing me to look into a few life-preserving options or cures that were available for sickle cell. At the time, the options were few and far between. There was the popular but unreliable bone marrow transplant, which had the added difficulty of finding a bone marrow match within your nuclear family, and not to mention the 3 to 6 month wait/recovery time, plus the added penalty of your body rejecting the bone marrow and contracting skin and graft disease. Also, it's virtually impossible to find a doctor willing to undertake this transplant on patients over the age of 30. Yeah, that wasn't for me. There was also the stem cell transplant. No bone marrow donor needed from immediate family members, a little less invasive than a bone marrow transplant, and less toxic as well due to the use of lower doses of chemotherapy. It does have a similar recovery time of 3 to 6 months, and it is safer for older patients, but the stem cell transplant didn't interest me as well. I know 3 to 6 months is a drop in the bucket to eliminate a lifetime of pain, physically, mentally, and emotionally. But deep down, I knew something better was on the horizon. Which brings me to the second reason why 2019 was the most important year in my life so far. I also took the first step to remove the turmoil of living with sickle cell from my family's genealogy. 2019 was the last time an older hair from my lineage will suffer because of sickle cell. I can't go into details, but I'm taking part in a clinical study that could potentially eradicate the genetic disease. Partaking in this groundbreaking therapy has been a bittersweet experience for me. The excitement of being involved and pioneering this new therapy is unmatched. Also, having a role in a therapy that can potentially change the life of 100,000 Americans and millions more worldwide is an honor like no other. With this great responsibility bestowed upon me, I have to admit there's also been a little bit of fear and anxiousness. Although it is a blessing to be one of a select few to be picked to try out this new therapy, I have to acknowledge the feeling of trepidation that consumes me. Albeit not often, I find myself wondering what could go wrong. I have in fact by definition signed up to be a lab rat. I am the test dummy for this therapy before it can be safely released to the public. For me, after all things considered, the decisions came down to two fundamental things. One being the potential to suppress the suffering my offspring and their children may face, and the other was simply a play for more time. The way I see it, taking part in this clinical trial is only going to give me more time, no matter the risk unbeknownst to me. Statistically, men with sickle cell hemoglobin S have a life expectancy of only 42 years. This statement never brought an inkling of fear to me. But now as a father, I'm trembling in my boots. It made sense to me as a single man that the carriers of this unique but life-altering hemoglobin didn't have a full life. What human wants to endure a lifetime of severe pain, organ damage, mental illness, prejudice, discrimination, just to name a few? But as a husband and a father, even without the breakthrough of the clinical trial, I'd endure multiple lifetimes of sickle cell as long as I have my family. I want to be here long enough to confirm the work I'm doing now will ensure my grandchildren will escape the chaotic clutches of sickle cell. I want to be here long enough to make sure my son is a better man than me. And I want to be here long enough to properly conclude with my wife our enchanting love story. 4 decades is not nearly enough time to achieve this, but I feel like for the first time, I have every chance to.
Next, we're going to hear from Steph Shea. Steph and her husband had never even heard of hemophilia when their son Dakota was born. After a rocky start, the lengths they've gone to have finally led to the right treatment and care for Dakota. But the victory was hard won. Here's Steph Shea.
Hemophilia doesn't run in our family, and so when my now 5-year-old son Dakota was first diagnosed, we were all shocked. We had never even heard the term hemophilia before, but we quickly learned everything that we could and we joined our local chapter. The beginning of our hemophilia journey was pretty uneventful. Dakota was born early, so we received the diagnosis after a routine heel prick that didn't clot, rather than the traumatic circumcision story that I hear so often. We found out I was pregnant again when Dakota was only 6 months old, so I initiated starting prophylaxis treatment. I was worried about being able to watch Coda closely enough as he was learning to walk when the new baby came. Like with most babies, Dakota was too chubby to be able to easily find veins, and after many failed attempts with many different home health nurses, his hematologist said she thought it'd be fine to wait until he was 2. I distinctly remember the moment when I realized that I would have to fight for my child and be his advocate on this crazy hemophilia journey. When he was 18 months old, Dakota was downstairs at the hospital in pre-op, getting ready to have his first port placed. He had fallen out of a baby seat 5 months before and had suffered a head bleed as a result. While treating the head bleed, he developed an inhibitor, and at the time we had a PICC line placed so that we could easily give him treatment every day. The PICC line had been in since the head bleed, so it had gradually been slipping, and it was no longer considered a central line. 5 months is a very long time to have a PICC line. And in fact, we'd been at the hospital nearly every day in the week prior having IVs placed because the PICC line wasn't working anymore. The IV team, who we had seen at the hospital just the day before, told us that it didn't matter if the latest IV only worked once, since they'd be placing a new PICC line tomorrow during the surgery. Fast forward back to the day of the surgery. Dakota was in pre-op, and I mentioned the PICC line. They said they didn't have orders to place a new PICC line, and so I raced upstairs to speak to his hematologist and find out why. This is the moment that clearly stands out in my mind. I remember standing in the hallway and telling her that we wanted a new one put in. She very adamantly said she did not recommend it, and she told me her reasoning. If I knew then what I know now, I would have listened to my intuition and pushed for it. But alas, hindsight is 20/20, right? The PICC line didn't get placed, the old one didn't last, and the treatment team encouraged us to use the new port before it was fully healed. It was still so swollen and raw, and again, if I knew then what I know now, I never would have let it happen. I don't blame myself, but it's definitely a pivotal point in our story and in my learning to advocate for my boy. The first time the port was ever used, it hurt him immensely. The port was so swollen, it was hard to tell if the needle was placed correctly, and since there was no blood return, the nurse tried to manipulate it and move the needle into place. The manipulation ended up causing another bleed, and we were admitted back into the hospital for another week. The next hospital stay wouldn't have been the worst thing, except because of the trauma of the first time we used the port. Dakota, myself, and my husband then all dealt with debilitating needle anxiety daily for nearly a year. It was extremely traumatic for us all, and it took a long time for us to find our rhythm. The port was also placed in an unusual spot, and his team questioned why the surgeon put it there, and they said they firmly supported another surgery to have it placed elsewhere, which we declined. We silently questioned why a discussion about placement wasn't had before the actual surgery. Most ports are placed high on the chest, and Dakota's was placed under his armpit, by his ribs. After the surgery, we dealt with some odd things with the port. Every time we used it, which was every day due to his inhibitor and starting immune tolerance induction, it would bleed for prolonged periods of time. We were advised to put a pressure wrap, some Coban tape, and an ACE bandage around his abdomen, which quickly became our norm after accessing the port. Despite the pressure wrap, though, he would bleed through shirts and bed sheets, quickly became anemic, and we felt powerless to help our son stop bleeding. The experts admitted that they weren't quite sure why it was happening, and so we decided to leave our home that we loved and move across the country to get some answers. Looking back and reflecting on this period of time in our lives feels very surreal. I feel disbelief that we went through all these things, yet I'm obviously very aware of the impact of just how much they've shaped our journey. Trauma is an interesting experience and one that's familiar for most people living with blood clotting conditions. I'm so happy to see the conversation about trauma and mental health being had more and more often within our community. There's no doubt that the things we all experience are challenging, and talking and sharing about it all can be very healing. The rare blood clotting condition community has honestly been such a blessing throughout our journey. I remember going to a national conference while we were going through the worst of our times, when Dakota was bleeding uncontrollably from the port and no one knew why or what to do. I remember meeting an older woman, a mother of 2 grown boys with hemophilia, who made a statement acknowledging how hard it all was sometimes, and I remember just breaking down crying in her arms. I remember meeting a guy with hemophilia and inhibitors about my age who not only gave me such a different perspective on living with the condition, but he gave me insight into a treatment that ended up being life-changing for us. I always say that I learn more from our community than I do from the medical professionals, and it's true. The medical professionals study blood clotting conditions in school, but they don't live with it every day the way that we do. No 2 people with blood clotting conditions are the same, and there's definitely no one-size-fits-all model. Everything we went through when Dakota was a baby and toddler led to me now being the biggest advocate for my son's needs. I no longer ignore my intuition when it comes to medical decisions. I no longer just blindly trust the experts without researching and talking to our community. And I've learned that I know my son and his rare condition better than anyone else. It's been empowering for me to gain this knowledge, and it came in handy last summer when Dakota's port got infected. He was in the hospital for nearly 3 weeks, and I questioned everything. I was determined not to have a repeat of his first surgery, where lack of communication and mistakes led to ongoing trauma for my family. And although it wasn't easy by any stretch of the means, I'm happy to say that we got through it and we've been able to move on with our lives easier than we did the first time around. I'm so grateful for all that we've learned, and most importantly, for growth. Hemophilia and other blood clotting conditions are not for the faint of heart, that's for sure. Very often there's pain and trauma, suffering, anxiety, depression, and many other challenges to face. I'll never forget that moment that I realized I would have to fight for my son and advocate for him. I'll never forget that moment because it shaped our lives so much going forward. And learning that lesson has not only been empowering for my whole family, but it's made this wild journey easier.
Lastly, we're going to hear from Sue Martin. In the mid-90s, Sue went from having 5 healthy kids to suddenly having 3 boys diagnosed with hemophilia overnight, right on the heels of the contamination crisis. It's an inspiring story for sure. Here's Sue Martin.
On Thanksgiving morning, 1996, at 12:03 a.m., my life changed forever. You know how they say when you have one of those pivotal moments in your life that makes a big impact or changes you in some way? You remember exactly where you were and what you were doing. I've had several pivotal moments in my lifetime, but there was one of those moments that honestly was one of the darkest, but in the long run has been one of the most rewarding for me on a personal basis. On that day in 1996, My son was diagnosed with hemophilia, and within a week, 3 of my 5 children had all been diagnosed with hemophilia. I'll never forget those words. "We know what's wrong with your son. He has hemophilia." Suddenly, our entire family had to adapt to a new way of life. I married my high school sweetheart in 1980, and we ended up having 5 kids, including a set of twins. Once you find out that you're having twins, you become a high-risk pregnancy, and we worried about that throughout my term of carrying the boys. Unbeknownst to us, these 2 identical twin boys would also be born with hemophilia. They made it through the birth, but not without complications. However, no one picked up on the fact that they had hemophilia until much later. With many complicated concerns affecting all 3 of my boys, they weren't diagnosed until my twins were the age of 6, and my middle son was the age of 9. One of my twins had a kidney bleed, and that opened up a whole lot of questions and testing. Dr. Diane Nugent from the Northern California made the diagnosis. At that time, there weren't all the social media that you have today, all the websites, the hemophilia groups, and the many national organizations that help community members connect, receive information, and provide resources. I needed to connect with someone quickly because this was so foreign to us as we had no family history. I was overwhelmed. I had panic attacks for 2 years. I went from having a beautiful family with 5 healthy children to having 3 of them now diagnosed with hemophilia, a lifelong, life-threatening condition. It was also just a short time after the AIDS crisis, and I was very scared. My first connection to anyone with children who had hemophilia was to Laura Kelly. She had, I think, the very first online social media email group. I can't remember what they called it at that time, but I wrote to her after joining the group. I shared my story and I explained I was a new mom, having no clue of what was ahead of me in the years to come. And there weren't many resources at that time. We had a local chapter in Colorado, and I was given their number by my nurse, Sue Garrity. I reached out to them soon afterwards. However, I needed more. I needed to talk to someone. I desperately needed to talk to another mother. I'll never forget the moment I finally made a connection. Do you remember the old AOL site saying, "You've got mail"? I remember when I heard that for the first time. I dropped to my knees and cried. It was from Laura Kelly. She said, "I know what you're going through," and provided me comfort in her writing. She assured me that I would be all right and that there were people all around the world that can help me. From that moment on, I soon became involved in chapter services. My biggest disappointment at that time was that there was a difficult relationship between the chapter and the Hemophilia Treatment Center. It saddened me at that time because I thought they should be working together to help new moms, new patients, and everyone they both served. So I joined my local chapter, and it wasn't long after that I was elected to the board of directors. I needed more connections. I wanted to learn more. I wanted to be involved in this community, and I needed answers for my sons who were depending on me to help them live this new normal with hemophilia in their lives. My biggest challenge was ensuring that my boys were always able to live a high quality of life. I wanted to make sure that their emotional well-being was taken care of, because I always said I could fix a broken limb or deal with something with their body, but I can't fix a broken mind. For me, raising sons, that was the most important thing, to make sure that their mental state was all right. But the limitations on their physical abilities had a drastic impact on their mental well-being. Unfortunately, they were born into a family of sports, and of course, football was the sport that everybody loved and wanted to play. In fact, their father went to college on a full-ride scholarship to Iowa and played at Drake University. Our life plan was to have our children follow in their father's footsteps, if they wanted to. We quickly realized that there were some sports they could play and some they should not. But the quest for football was something we couldn't get out of them, and that was torture for me personally. I felt extremely guilty. Many years during the football season, they let me know how angry they were about it, but I quickly learned from others in the community how to handle their feelings. I also challenged myself to learn more, so I could understand and explain the reasoning behind our parenting decisions. I went to every conference, every national meeting, and all social events. I asked questions from everybody. I went to medical symposiums and sat in the audience when I shouldn't have even been there because it was for doctors. I learned anything and everything I could about hemophilia, every aspect I could learn. I wanted to make sure that I could gently guide my boys through life with their hemophilia, and I still do that today. They make their own choices now. It's not my job to raise them anymore. But we have a mutual respect to discuss their decisions on their health care in terms of hemophilia. They still look to me for some answers and advice, but I can no longer drive their decisions, and that's as it should be. Looking back now, it was a long journey, one that was painful at times, but one that brought us strength, helped us develop courage, and joined together a family into a tight unit, one that still keeps us close today. So that was the moment in 1996 when my life changed, when the picture we dreamed as a family changed forever. But along with all those difficulties, I've had many extremely rewarding experiences, particularly with my journey into leadership role I hold now as the Executive Director of Hemophilia South Carolina. That journey happened organically throughout the years. By being extremely involved in the community, I have received many gifts of many great friends, colleagues, and personal rewards far beyond what I could ever have imagined. Helping a new mom connect and find comfort, providing gentle guidance and support to teens at camps, or fathers when we talk, has been a life blessing, one I believe in my heart was meant to be. I never thought I would be going to Washington and advocating for health care, or meeting with legislators on bills we are asking to implement in our state, meeting with state agencies and directors who make big decisions, individuals in government healthcare and advocacy, receiving national awards on stage at our bleeding disorder conferences, advocating for sponsoring kids with bleeding disorders in foreign countries, sharing in a podcast, and presenting in front of hundreds of people never was in my life plans, but here we are. So how did I get here as the Executive Director of Hemophilia South Carolina? When we moved to South Carolina 17 years ago, I quickly realized the chapter needed help, as do all chapters and their boards. While I was involved in chapter services for many years in Colorado, on the board of directors in various positions throughout my tenure, I began to help out again on the board here in South Carolina. In time, I ended up being the president, and when the National Hemophilia Foundation requested from all chapters and chapter charter agreements that they needed to have a full-time executive director, the board asked me to take that position. I love my job. I wake up every single day thinking how I can make things better, how I can grow, how I can provide more services. How can I gather people and get them involved? How can I get them to feel like I do? How good you feel when you help somebody. What am I not doing well enough? And what on earth can I do better? I am rewarded every single time somebody reaches out to say thank you, and I know I have had a small hand in that appreciation. I love helping individuals find peace and answers in whatever they are looking for. I think it's our duty as a community to continue to help those that are new in this community, those who are still suffering. My journey with my kids will never end, but they don't need me like they used to. So now it's my time to do what I can for the next generation, as that is what those before us did for my family. I love to advocate on assuring access to quality care and treatment for all. This is everyone's duty. We are not one, but many, and when one bleeds, we all bleed. Our goal should be to ensure every family who has a new child born today with hemophilia or a bleeding disorder has all the resources they need for a high quality of life. I love working with all my chapter colleagues. I have never seen so many individuals that are so passionate about helping this community. The work accomplished by the international community, like the World Federation of Hemophilia, is also heartwarming. And I am so proud to be just one of the many leaders in this global bleeding disorders community who work hard to change lives and make living with hemophilia, von Willebrand's disease, and all rare bleeding disorders just a little easier. Our chapter and national organizations are so engaged in advocacy and spreading awareness, fighting every day for healthcare access and better lives with treatment care. I look forward to our future and hope one day a true cure will be discovered. But until then, I'm excited to see what happens, where the community goes, and what we can accomplish together. We still have a lot to do as a community, protecting our access to care and ensuring we never go back in time. My life has been blessed by the people I have met along this journey, and while I can't say why God gave me the hemophilia gene to pass along to my sons, I hope one day they will know that I did all I could to make their lives better and as best as it can be. while helping others too find their best journeys in life.
This episode of Bloodstream Journeys was written by Heather Robb, featuring real-life stories from Jimmy O'Legary, Steph Shea, and Sue Martin. This episode was produced by Rob Bradford, Avra Friedman, and Joshua Sterling Bragg. Audio editing and sound design by Joshua Sterling Bragg and Colby Crow. Distribution and engagement by Avra Friedman and Colby Crow. Art and promotion by Katie Wright-Mead and Ryan Gielen. And Bloodstream Journeys is executive produced by Patrick James Lynch and Ryan Gielen. Special thanks to Hirden Monge, Matt Morgan at Sit and Spin Recording Studios, and Sam Gates at Octocorn Records. If you want to reflect on your journey to this moment right here, and tell your story, visit us at bloodstreammedia.com/mystory. We have a simple form. Write your story in it. Or tell us a little about yourself and what you want to write about, even if you don't yet know how. And click submit. We'll be in touch, and together we'll get your story told. Bloodstream Journeys would not be possible without the incredible ongoing support of BioMarin, so we say thank you to BioMarin for their vision and generosity and all the ways they empower the bleeding disorders community to learn, heal, and grow through self-expression. Thank you, BioMarin. Other Bloodstream podcasts include the community touchstone, the Bloodstream Podcast. Bloodstream is an entertaining and informative podcast hosted by Natalie and Patrick Lynch and provides a 360-degree look at the bleeding disorders community through news, interviews, and informed opinionating on the topics that matter most. We also produce the popular Ask the Expert podcast. Ask the Expert was created to help answer some of the biggest questions we receive from community members, both online and in person, as we travel the country producing content and live events for the community. Ask the Expert is hosted by Believe's Director of Innovation and former nonprofit executive, Amy Board, and features the top community experts on new subjects every episode. Also, there will be a bunch of new shows and podcasts coming throughout 2020 from Bloodstream Media. So be sure to visit www.bloodstreammedia.com for all of the shows produced by us. Or you can search Bloodstream Media anywhere podcasts are distributed, downloaded, streamed, or watched. Happy listening.